Chasing Lights. So there's a question that is asked all the time, and it's part of how we get to know each other, and it's I guess it's small talk. It's really kind of the start of a conversation, which is always, where are you from? Where do you come from? And I think it's something that we all want to know, and we want to know it for a lot of reasons. I think some of it's cultural and trying to figure out a connection to someone else. I think part of it is just we kind of grade each other on where we're from, or we have some assumptions that go along with that. But I think it's actually asking another question that's a little bit deeper, and I want to explore it a little bit today, which is, where do you belong? And I think if you just take some time and think about that question, you can get yourself into some pretty deep areas very, very quickly, because where we're from, where we are now, where we're going, those things are always moving. And somehow underneath that, we have to understand, where do we belong? And it's not an easy question to answer. I don't know if I can answer it, but I'm going to try to get someone to answer it for me. And I'm very excited to talk with friend and colleague Marc Royer, who is a managing director at Cushman Wakefield. And Mark has an interesting answer to those questions, I think. So, Mark, thank you for joining me for Chasing Lights Conversations. And I want you to just kind of come at trying to answer the question to start with: where have you lived, and where are you from?
Yeah, so I do feel that there are some themes that when listening to the podcast of Chasing Lights that have some reflections on my life and how I've been basically traveling around the world, and both with my parents and on my own initiative. So I'm originally from France, born in Toulouse. My Both my parents are French, and I've had the opportunity to live in the U.S. So initially in Florida and then in California. I then moved back to France. I studied in the UK. I started my real estate career in Spain with the idea of potentially using the Spanish language also for Latin America. It actually turned out to be the case, because I then moved to Latin America. Lived in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and finally made my way back to the U.S., where I am currently living now in Florida. So I where to the question of where I belong, I feel I am a citizen of the world, and I truly consider myself very fortunate to have been exposed to all these different cultures, places, people, because it actually has given me the possibility to adapt and adapt to not only circumstances of life, but also adapt in my career, in my way of living, in the people that surround me, or and in trying to convey this also to my family. Um, I I am married to a Korean, native Korean, who has a similar background. Also, I would just wanted to mention, because she has the very young. She moved from Korea to New Zealand, and then was living in Australia. We met in Argentina, and basically she moved to Argentina, and since then, well, we've been moving around together. Um, so the belonging is again a, a, an excellent question, and it's something that I think of on probably on a daily basis. And these experiences help me to also define and determine where I want to go, because I'm I don't consider that being in one place will always give me enough. So I'm always thinking perhaps I should think of the next place. So yeah, that's a long introduction of where I've been, and and the belonging is a continuous question. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me because I've always loved the term "citizen of the world." I've always thought that was in some ways the ultimate of cool. This idea that you can be anywhere and to some degree belong anywhere because you're part of this whole world, and yet there's this whole idea of belonging to maybe a tribe, and maybe citizens of the world is a tribe. It's a group of people that can navigate various jurisdictions, various countries. But there's also this idea that is not that old. I mean, a lot of people talk about being patriotic and being loyal to a single country. As being a kind of a solid part of what it means to be human, and yet the idea of nationality is a relatively new idea in terms of human evolution. I mean, the passports have really only been around for a little more than 100 years. That this idea of where are there's those boundaries, those borders. If I step this way, I'm in one country. I step another way, I'm in another country. There's nothing natural about it. It's this idea, and yet people live and die for their country. There is this idea that I am of this country, therefore I'm fundamentally different and I guess better than any other country, which tends to get us into trouble as well. But here you are, kind of as part of uh, this kind of more macro perspective or this meta perspective of belonging to all countries, but maybe belonging to none. Is that what it feels like? Or I mean, let's put it this way. And as you walk down the streets in southern Florida, and you're someone who was born in France, has lived in Latin America as well as the United States, different parts of Europe, and your wife kind of covers the rest of the globe with Asia. Uh, do you feel like you belong there?
That's a great question, Gunnar. And I would say yes, I do feel that I belong in it because it gives me points of attachment to having lived and having been exposed to these cultures gives me a point of attachment to get closer to people
Yeah.
of these different regions. So obviously, when we're talking about South Florida, there is a strong influence of Latin America. So
Right.
and you many times you probably speak more Spanish than English, in certain parts of, for instance, of Miami. And I'm always happy to actually switch the English to the Spanish or to the
Right.
Portuguese, or in certain circumstances even to my mother tongue, which is French. That is something that is very. I think I've been able to actually develop this to make it a soft skill,
Yeah.
and I really truly value this as something that is part of me, and I am part of the others also, basically.
Right.
So there's a real exchange, um, and the more when I look back at when I was living, for instance, in Spain, where I spent 10 years of my life, started my career there. I, for instance, feel that I'm almost half Spanish to a certain
Hmm.
extent, and I have very I have many friends and deep relationships with people in Madrid. The same applies, in Chile. The same applies in Argentina, in Brazil, in the U.S. And when I go there, or when I move around in these countries, they are my second homes, to say
Right.
that. So that is something for me that is extremely valuable, because I can actually use this also for to meet more people, to understand how the people think, or try to understand how they think, uh, to try to direct also the conversations, and also to really exchange in terms of values, of the way we conceive uh, the work environment,
Right.
the relationship environment, um, and the fact also I'm very fortunate to actually have the possibility to speak the several languages, because that is also the real way to communicate in a more in-depth way, with
Right.
these cultures. Uh,
Do you find when you switch languages, and you have, it sounds like, 3 or 4 different languages that you move between, do you find yourself perhaps thinking differently when you move into a different language, or feeling different, when you're in a conversation with someone in English, or you're in a conversation with someone in French or Spanish or Portuguese? I mean, is there a switch that occurs inside you, as well as what someone might be hearing?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it changes the way it's just a different perspective of how you think, how you communicate things, and this applies not only when you're actually speaking to people, but also even if you're even writing an email. When you're going to be writing an email, in French to and this can be also in different parts of the world, right? Because when you're writing
Mhm.
an email in French to a Canadian French speaker, it's gonna be different than when you're actually addressing it to a French person in Paris, for instance. So I always try to put myself in the people, the person that will receive the email, or to whom I'm speaking with, if it's in a conversation, to really use this to get to the person and convey really in the way that person thinks.
Mhm.
So it's basically trying to put myself in the skin of of the people I'm communicating with. And this goes even a little bit further because when moving to the US, for instance, um, I started, so after several years. So I moved to the US when I was 5, and very quickly I started dreaming and thinking in English, which I
Right.
was not before that. And this can actually happen if you spend enough time in a country or exposed to a culture, where I started doing the same when I was in Spain. I was sometimes thinking in Spanish,
Right.
and the same would apply, with Portuguese, etc. So this does give a completely different perspective, because you are using um, a different um, way of structuring your the way you speak, the way you communicate, and
Mhm.
therefore the way you are.
Yeah.
So it makes you a little bit more versatile, I would say.
Well, absolutely, and I think it's interesting you point to dreams, and how, you can dream in multiple languages. A part of what I think is kind of interesting to me, especially if you spend a lot of time in different parts of the world, whether you do so for work, or you do so for living in those different places, but you're spending concentrated time doing regular things. You're not touring. You're not just going and seeing the sights in a particular city. That in some ways, it is possible to be more familiar with neighborhoods in cities that you don't live in than the city you're in. There are neighborhoods in Miami you don't know, and neighborhoods in New York or in London or Paris or Los Angeles much better than those neighborhoods. So when you dream, there is a dream city. This dream city is an amalgamation of the places where you live. And we, especially in this modern age where and if you have a job that pushes you around in terms of having to travel around the world, you are spending your days, in a city that's an amalgamation of different neighborhoods from different cities around the world. You have your favorite coffee shop in Tokyo that you always go to. You have your favorite place to have dinner in London. You have, this area where you love walking by the same flower shop, but it happens to be in Buenos Aires. So you have this all comes together in one dream life. If you were to create a map of Mark Royer's city, what do you think that would look like?
That's a fascinating question, and I hadn't thought of the amalgamation of cities, as you say, for in a dream. But I think it would look something very close to. I do have my favorite cities. Madrid is one of them, and where I
Hmm.
did spend 10 years. So it would be a combination of that with the beauty also of Paris, because it is for me one of the most beautiful cities. The the dynamic of New York, uh, and also the so I would add perhaps something, the connection to the water also, because of Miami, because
Mhm.
I love to spend time on the water. My parents were big into sailing, and I've also been doing that for throughout my life. So it would be something of that nature, and with people with a representation of people all throughout these different places, where it could have, them unite together, sort of United Nations city. Um, but that's something, yeah, that if I were an artist, I would love to actually try to paint this.
Right.
It would be something very intriguing for me. Um,
But part of what's interesting to that picture too is that, for example, you and I both share these cities. We spend time in these cities, but I'd argue that our maps would look different. We have different neighborhoods that are our versions of Miami or New York or wherever else it might be. But there's another aspect to this that gets even more interesting. If you spend time over the decades going to these cities at different points in your life or different places, even with your home city, wherever you might live, that you are in different neighborhoods. So in the late 1980s, my New York was the West Side because of what I
hmm,
was doing for a living at that time, and the plate, the friends' couches that I would sleep on, and actually I lived in an apartment for a very short period of time on the West Side for a couple of months. Uh, so that was my neighborhood. Then my more modern version, my 21st century version of New York, is on the East Side, and I find sometimes when I walk a few extra blocks to go to the west side, I step through space and time to another neighborhood and another version of myself. Do you have that experience in Madrid? Do you have that experience in Paris, in New York, where you have Marc Royer part one in one neighborhood, Marc Royer part two in another? What does that feel like?
Absolutely. As cities change, and as has been quite a long time already that I've been living, in these different cities. I mean, I go back to Madrid and I see a different Madrid, from when I was living there, from 2002 to 2012. And I actually discover new places, and I go back to my past also when I go to those neighborhoods where I was living. The same applies obviously to Miami. When I was living here we moved here in the mid '80s. It was obviously at the time with the, Miami Vice, a different city,
Right.
and we were living more in the North Miami. I'm now living in Miami Beach, and I had a complete different way of seeing the city.
Mhm.
And the city has dramatically changed also.
Absolutely.
So this is it is something that applies to cities, and, as you say, to neighborhoods. Um, I I think it's especially in cities of a certain size, that have a certain exposure to people that are coming in and out, and more exposure to different cultures. It's even more so. So hence, you the example of New York, I think, is the best in that case, of how the city has been moving around and the neighborhoods are changing, etc. So that's something, indeed, that I live almost on a, uh, on the basis of the going to those cities, because I am luckily am fortunate to actually travel to those cities
Yeah.
for different reasons, for business and for leisure. So I do live that going back in the past, as you say.
No, the back and forth, and I know it makes me sound, it's kind of depressing to say this, but there's part of me that almost enjoys, or not enjoys, but finds that I can connect to another place better if I go there for work, at least
Hmm.
initially. And it sounds like awful, like I'm some, empty suit that I just, like going to work in Paris or whatever. But I what it has been interesting to me over the years is that if I'm working somewhere and I'm there for more than just a quick fly in, have a meeting, fly out, but I'm there for several days. And especially if I go there repeatedly over time, that instead of it being a tourist experience, which is great, that's fun too. I love doing it for leisure. It's great fun, but it's a whole different level to just be part of the life of a city. To feel like, yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm still someone from somewhere else, and especially if I don't speak the local language, I'm separated even further. But the idea of just getting into the rhythm of a place that's different, that has a different perspective on things, I found has given me so much. And you think, oh man, I'm in a beautiful city and all I'm doing is working, showing up at meetings. But I'm also, having lunch at everyone's favorite sandwich shop, whatever that might be, or I'm just walking down the street along with every other person that has to sludge off to work. What does that feel like, and where does, how does that change things, as opposed to being on a beach, or being in a lovely hotel somewhere and being able to relax and all those kinds of things, which are wonderful. And obviously I'm very lucky to have had those experiences as well, but I also think I'm equally as fortunate, if not more so, to have lived in the normal life of a place, or something approaching that. Obviously you don't get there until you've been there for a very long time, but would you agree that actually there's something valuable to the work experience as well? It's not all sludging along and the trudge.
Of course, I totally share the same feeling that when you are actually traveling for work, you are connected also, with basically the working society of the city, and the flows of people, going to the lunch places, as you said, the dinner places. It's a completely different dynamic than going as a pure tourist, just to enjoy the city and go to the museums, which is obviously
Right.
the
Yeah.
beautiful part of it also. But it's just you feel that you're more part of the city or connected to the city when you're actually going there for work. That's what I feel, at least. Yeah.
And when you think about it, actually, tourism, as we define it, and as we do it, it assumes a stasis of sorts. So think of and this suggested to me by you talking about or mentioning museums, is that museums are almost, you take a culture and you put it under glass.
Mm.
It's static. This is how it's been. This is how it will always be. And when you are in the flow, as you said, of the working life, the regular life of a city, it's changing, it's moving, it's constantly changing. So when we're traveling, we're looking for the pictures, we're looking for the static, and no judgment on that. Obviously, that's a big part of what we value in places. And one of the hardest things for, I think, people to accept is the fact that the world around us is constantly changing. And, we say that easily. Oh, the world is always changing, but we don't want it to. We will fight like crazy to keep things from changing because we like perhaps what we have, or we don't trust what will happen in the future if we allow change to happen. And yet you, as a citizen of the world, are constantly changing your position. So I imagine that you are probably less heated about keeping Miami Beach exactly as it's been for the last 10 years, because you don't have that kind of connection to something staying the same. Or do you feel, I mean, do you resist change as much as anyone else?
No, well, the nature my nature is actually to enjoy change,
Right.
and to make the best of it. And seeing things change is something positive for me, because it can sometimes, they are negative changes, but I try to see the best part of the changes, especially when it comes to cities where you have, people from different parts of the world that are moving around the neighborhoods, and that create that the identity of those neighborhoods.
Hmm.
So the Miami Beach, for instance, which was completely different, 25 years ago than what it is today. Today, it's very international, and not only from Latin America. It's people from all over the world. I have
Hmm.
a lot of French friends that are living in Miami Beach. You have people from all over Europe, obviously. Even Asians that are actually enjoying Miami Beach, and that's what makes Miami Beach even more interesting today because
Right, right.
it's actually a melting pot of cultures. Yeah, so that's something that I see in terms of change, which is extremely positive.
Hmm. As we think about all these kind of different places, part of what a lot of people talk about, and it's part of the rhetoric right now, and around the world, is this kind of competition or tension between more urban areas and more rural areas, from smaller towns to larger global cities.
Mm,
And a lot of the places that we work in now are very much part of the network of global cities. So they tend to be at a certain size. They tend to be in constant communication with each other, culturally as well as economically and politically. But you've also spent time off of that main grid. And I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts of, are there differences? And is it the same as perhaps people talk about it? Or is there more nuance to it?
so I'm happy you asked that question because that's probably what I felt was the biggest connection to chasing lights was my experience going in the more remote part of certain places. And I'll just take a step back and just to explain a little bit about how also my way of going around the world just came from my parents. My parents were very adventurous and pioneers in what they were doing. They were uh, developing power plants across the world in Africa and then in Central America. Hence why we moved to Miami. Um, and were proud, took pride in bringing light to people, as they would describe it. So bringing electricity, basically, to remote places, and that brought us at one point in the early '90s uh, to California. Now, this is the remote part of inner California, so basically um, around Nevada City, then Clipper Mills. I was actually going to school there, and I had the possibility of living in a even in a mobile home, and living in the forest. So um, and that was probably one of the not the most valuable, but it was an extremely insightful part of life for me was discovering remote places and how people live in those remote places, being in nature. So I found myself a little bit in when you talk about the frontier. Obviously it's a lot more less frontier than Alaska, but it was something very different for me, uh getting out of the city and living in more in the nature and being connected to the nature, and the relationships that you develop in places like that are very different. You obviously have less people for a start, um, and and uh, and those people are connected also to nature. And you also, but interestingly, in that part of California, there were a lot of also Mexicans that actually had moved there, were hard workers, and so I actually connected with a lot of Mexican people. Not a lot, but I had uh, a dear friend, or at least who I connected almost on a weekly basis, who was running the grocery store and who was very happily receiving me there. Um, so I think that when you talk about remote, I mean about more bigger cities versus remote places, there's it it is actually very valuable to see both, to actually be able to live in both. and not being only the city boy or the countryside boy. But so I've been exposed to a little bit of both, and I consider myself very fortunate. And I thank my parents for that also, obviously. So um, and it's something also that I look for when I, for instance, go to France. Obviously love going to the countryside, and the same applies uh, in the different places that I've been able to live in Argentina. It would be Patagonia, which is absolutely fascinating, and I would spend uh, a lot of our vacations there. And both for with all the activities that goes with it, etc. The fishing or the skiing or all these, and being exposed to that nature is just fantastic for me. It's the same applies also, for the sailing. It gives you that sense of freedom, and it complements the experience of the urban living.
Well, and certainly when you're in nature, as you said, or you're in places that are not as controlled by human beings, part of it is the fact that it is not controlled. It is You're dealing with something that's much bigger than you. You cannot control it. You have to move with it. You have to kind of experience it as something that's far larger than you are. But part of what I find interesting about those different places, so your experiences in rural California or in Patagonia versus Madrid, Paris, Miami, is one where when you listen to people that have only been in one or the other, they have impressions of what it means to be the other or in the other area. And at least in my experience, I feel like both parties, so whether it's someone who's only been out in the country talking about what it is about city people, or city people saying what it's like to be some hick from the sticks, right? That since I'm both a hick from the sticks and someone who's spent most of my time in cities in the last 60 years, I think both parties aren't seeing each other. That a lot of the stress, the tension, and certainly France is notorious for having great tension for hundreds and hundreds of years between the country and the city, uh, is is in great part because we don't see the other, and we're not that different. We are different in ways in terms of the experience of being in these environments changes how you deal with things. But the impressions we have of the other are not strictly speaking accurate. Um, is that part of what you get from being in both, that you kind of see more of a reality?
I think so, and that's why I think it's valuable, because you learn to understand the other. Um there is, as you say, there is obviously a lot of polarization and completely different views of and perceptions of how someone in a remote area or in the countryside sees a urban person, and vice versa,
Hmm.
as you were rightly pointing to. Um, this is the fact of having lived a little bit in both, gives you that angle of saying, hey, let me take a little bit of this part of the countryside living, and this part of the urban living,
Hmm.
and ideally being able to combine a little bit both, but especially even more so not having a judgmental approaches to, this is a countryside person or this is a city
Right,
person.
right.
You learn to basically understand a little bit how things are lived and how people think, and that there is a beauty to both sides.
Hmm.
um yeah.
Well, and part of what I would love to see people, shift a little bit of the rhetoric and a little bit of the thinking, is that at the end of the day, the country and farm country and small towns are just neighborhoods in a much bigger city. That they're different, certainly in terms of the experience of being there is different, but at the end of the day, we are so connected to each other. We one cannot survive without the other. That the country needs the city. That's where a lot of the economic energy, a lot of the innovation and technology can come from the city. The supply chain is important and being able to connect into the supply chain. At the same time, the city needs the country to eat. It needs the country in terms of, the natural world is just as important for people who live in the city. And because of the way we connect by telephone, by media, by roads and planes and boats, and we are still connected to each other, even if we're out in the middle of nowhere in Alaska or rural or Patagonia, we're still connected to this larger city. And there's part of me hopes that we understand the city not as bad or good, and that we don't see the country as being backward or remote or less a part of the world. That we are connected. And it brings me back to what your family did and how amazing and how poetic it is and how true to say that your parents were bringing light to these other places, that they were creating connection, and so important. And a lot of people now, they think, well, before the internet, no one was connected, and I would argue, well, no. We were still very much connected, even if it took more time for things to get to us. Even before the light was brought by the electrical engineers, even then it was connected. That everything about how we defined what it meant to live, even in a remote place, was connected in some way to this larger city. I'm not sure how we do that, though. I mean, how do we get people kind of to move or to consider looking at this as not a us versus them or one versus the other, but to see us as actually inextricably linked?
Well, I would say that we need each other. Um, the city needs I mean, the the city needs the countryside for for agricultural purposes, many times, or simply also for instance, in the case of California, it was hydroelectric power plants. So you
Right,
would
right.
you would actually create from nature light, which you
Hmm.
then send to the city. So uh, as things moved along with going back in the with the industrialization, obviously cities took more weight, right, or took more importance. But
Hmm.
as of today, I think as we look also to feed ourselves with more nature, we need to be exposed to going to the countryside. And so we there's an exchange, not only in products or in supply chains, etc. There's an exchange also in feeding the soul, right,
Right.
in getting what you get from looking at the beautiful mountains in Patagonia, or fishing, on in beautiful rivers. That's something that feeds, at least for me, that feeds the soul. And the same also applies when you go to the city and you live the energy and the boomingness of the built environment, and
Hmm.
and all that goes with it. So I think there are some countries that have a sort of that have generally cities that are probably a little bit smaller. I would take the example of Germany, that
Yeah.
has a very federal and spread out population, and they have found a very good balance. Um, and basically, the result of that is that you have people, and obviously also with the infrastructures, you have people that are living in the countryside that are very well connected to
Right.
the urban centers, but it's spread out all throughout the country. And that has an interesting aspect to it also, is that it actually creates more demographic movements across the country, because you can go a person that was living in Hamburg can all of a sudden decide to go live in Berlin or to
Right.
live in Stuttgart. Whereas where you have generally those countries that are more centralized in one bigger city, which is probably the case of France with Paris. It's more about Paris and eventually some secondary cities.
Right.
So
Right.
so it's fascinating when you look at it more, on a on a country basis, or sometimes on a regional basis, of how people actually conceive that, and how they like to be living perhaps not in the completely in that urban center, but they have the capacity to live, or to live close to it and be connected and commute very easily.
Mhm.
And
Well,
yeah.
part of what I think is kind of interesting as you talk about that and about the soul and about how we're feeding the soul from around the world. I think that's an interesting thing to plug into. Part of my experience of being in the frontier and how I experienced the frontier from a very young age was often seen through the lens of things that came from elsewhere. So, for example, Dumas was an essential part as a young boy of understanding the wildness of the world, seen through the idea of imagining myself like D'Artagnan or something, or that, or that these stories were an important part, and these stories came from Paris. They did not come from Alaska or California, or through the lens of Kurosawa and the filmmaker that inspired George Lucas with his samurai films, and how that inspired me to see the world in a particular way, even though I was looking out over Alaskan tundra or what have you. That that part of what we are is plugged into these urban things, whether we realize it or not. And you don't have to be, conversant in Shakespeare to understand the stories that we're telling and retelling, whether it's through uh, other media like television and film, or just stories that people tell each other. That these stories are all based on things that were developed by people in aggregate, or frankly, go back to some earlier stuff. So think about Gilgamesh, and going back to the Middle East and kind of the foundational elements of how we tell stories. Or you can talk about religious tracts, such as the Christian canon, or Buddhist canon of writings, and how that over time, even if you live in the middle of nowhere, that this is something you are connected to, that it's feeding your soul. What were the works in your mind that fed your soul when you were 5 or 6 years old and suddenly finding yourself in the United States, even though your parents were French and you started in France? What were the pieces that, no matter where you were, fed your soul and made you what you are?
um, that's a great question. What fed my soul, as when we moved to the US initially, was again my connection to water. I have always enjoyed the the nature. I mean, the water aspect, and especially the sea.
Hmm.
And living in Miami, we had the possibility of just enjoying that on a very frequent basis.
Hmm.
And that obviously led us, to being able to sail around. And sailing meant discovering new places, but discovering new places on the water.
Hmm.
So that was basically when we moved here. We started sailing, around the summer, and we would do island hopping, from and first it was the journey of getting to those islands, because when you're in South Florida, you have to, sail at least 1, 2, 3, 4 days to get to the final destination.
Yeah.
So that was something that was, for me, the journey and the adventure and the discovery was being able uh, to jump on the boat and to go discover new places, new people, uh, doing so on the water. So it's for me something that I need to continue doing. And I try to make my not make, but I try to enjoy this also with the family, and pass that passion on, which
Hmm.
feeds my soul. That's So I've always been, also, Alexandre Dumas is a great author, in terms of adventure. Um, I'm more, the Crusoe, adventures, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, that's something that it was amazing for me. Yeah, just to,
It reminds me of Odysseus. I mean, perhaps you were a little more Greek as you were exploring the islands in southern Florida. That that is interesting. I think we're all feeding on this kind of shared, especially I guess if you're a citizen of the world, we're all feeding at this kind of shared library, this shared restaurant, cafeteria, whatever metaphor we want to use, that's feeding our souls, that is feeding us literally. I mean, when you think about the culture of food and how we express ourselves as globalists, as people that exist in an environment where we want to be part of the entire world, not just of one neighborhood, but of many neighborhoods. That part of how we're doing that is what we eat, both physically and figuratively. And it seems to me, talking to you right now, part of what I'm getting is kind of a sense of goodness. I mean, we need to be thinking about what we're eating, and realize that what we're eating doesn't just come from our own efforts, but comes from this collective action of people around the world and over extended periods of time.
and we have to value the fact that things are not limitless, and in the aspect that we have to basically value how growing crops or fishing or those things are have obviously their limits in terms of the consequences they can have if you do over exploitation of certain
Right.
things.
Right.
um, so yeah, also a very important feature for me, and in terms of how to live, and how to feed the family and how to eat also on a daily basis.
Right.
um, just thinking of that, because we only have one planet, right?
And there is no other.
And
It's
there
we're all feeding from the same ocean. We're all connected to each other. I think maybe that's where it is. Maybe that's where we get a clue collectively. Is perhaps as we are approaching some very real limits in terms of how we engage with the world and with the resources we have. Maybe that's the spark that helps force us to stop seeing each other as other, but as somehow importantly connected.
Indeed, and the same applies also when you go back to light and electricity. And I think there are fascinating uh, new ways of generating electricity that actually help us to respect the environment in a better way, and to be more connected. And you've done a great job, showing that also in the industry, and with a fire. And I think this is more important than ever, as we share the same places, and as we want to sort of conserve our environment, both the urban and the non-urban environment.
They both count, and one can't exist without the other. Well, we've filled up some time here, and hopefully our listeners have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. Mark, thank you so much for spending a little bit of extra time. A reminder: Marc Royer is a managing director at Cushman and Wakefield, a real estate consulting and advisory firm around the world, a global citizen as much, if not more, than Marc Royer. Thank you for spending some time with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Gunnar. It was great talking to you. Thank you.